Oh, I'm live. Hi. My name is Judith Helfand, and I'm really privileged and deeply moved. I've just watched Strong Island by myself in my apartment in the midst of this pandemic, and I'm almost speechless. But I can't be speechless because I have to introduce you to the director, the brilliant creator of this movie, Yance Ford, and to Liz Kennedy, from Detroit, who's an extraordinary activist. They're going to come up any moment. And thank you both for being here. And Yancy, I thought I'd be really all prepared with notes and stuff, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I mean, I am. I have like pages of notes, but I'm really speechless. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think it's, first of all, thank you for having me, Judith. And Liz, thank you for being in conversation tonight. I have to say, just, I understand the intensity of Strong Island is magnified by the moment that we are living through, by the summer that we have been through this year, by the murders that we continue to see of our people, and by the incompetence of our criminal justice system. Actually, it's not incompetence, because I think that systems are designed to do what they do. So when we get these outcomes, it's really just, the design fulfilling its purpose. So yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot, but I'm not asking you to take care of me. I am just,
I'm wrapping the context of this moment around the film, and recognizing that for everybody, myself included, it's a difficult time to be watching this film.
Well, it was a difficult time when the movie came out. It was a difficult time when I watched it at the Museum of Modern Art with, 1,000 people in the room, and all of us, so proud of you. But it's an extraordinary piece of work. And I knew that, but, I sat here just sort of mesmerized by the art and the control and the restraint and the love between you and your mother and your sister and your family and your father to your brother to your mother, and your mother's strength and her conviction and her anger and what she had to bring with her to her death and what she didn't get, and then what you've pieced together. And it's an extraordinary, and it's an indictment, and it's a love letter. And we're thrilled to have you here this evening, particularly at the close of 2.5 days of really all of us sort of struggling to embrace the power of first person storytelling and to question, why do we need to do that, and what does it mean over time, and how does it function at different points in time, and when it is that we're called to say, okay, I got to tell this story, and I have to tell it in the first person. So we're privileged to have both of you, both to talk about the act and the art of telling this story, and then the art of your activism and what you're trying to do right now on the ground in Detroit, and how this movie, which is so much about landscapes and cityscapes and the landscape of a face and the landscape of the photographs and the landscape of your hands and the landscape of your mother and the house in Long Island and the redlining and the maps, and it's and all of the thought, the years of thought of putting it together, and then the landscape of Detroit and the extraordinary work that you're doing right now in all the ways that you are. So, I thought we would start with the art. Well, maybe we'll start with Liz. What's it like to see this work right now while you're on the ground doing the work that you're doing? And tell us about it.
Thank you, Judith. And thank you, Yance. Judith, I really appreciate your vulnerability because I'm also feeling very tender and very emotional right now. And yes, we need to speak his name, William Ford. He lives on. His story is all too familiar, unfortunately. So as I was watching it, I was reflecting earlier about a quote from a Detroit author, Adrienne Maree Brown, that she wrote, an emergent strategy. And she said, "We are in an imagination battle. Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Renisha McBride, and I will add William Ford, and so many others are dead because in some white imagination, they were dangerous. And that imagination is so respected that those who kill based on an imagined, radicalized fear of Black people are rarely held accountable." So this summer in Detroit, we have seen Detroit Police Department murder several more citizens, even in the midst of massive peaceful protests from Detroit Will Breathe and other on-the-ground grassroots orgs. We've seen an increase in the racialized surveillance of Project Greenlight, which is creating truly apartheid-like conditions for Detroit residents. We are the largest Black majority city in the United States. But we've also seen massive momentum for the abolitionist movement. And we've seen the rallying cry of defund the police spread like wildfire across the country. And so I feel really, really energized by that. William Ford's name is not lost. Hakeem Littleton's name is not lost. Renisha McBride, Tony McDade, these names are not lost to us. We are chanting them. We are remembering them. We are finding new ways to tell these stories. And I'm really inspired by this medium of a first-person documentary of how vulnerable it is. I'm inspired by new artistic mediums to tell these stories. I am a ceremonialist, and a lot of the work that I do as an abolitionist is actually just about holding ceremonies. It's about going to the protests and setting up an altar. It's about remembering the names and helping these people who we've lost to state violence transition to the next world as easily as possible. So yes, feeling tender, feeling emotional, but feeling deep, deep gratitude for just this witnessing, for this testimony. So thank you, Yance.
Thank you, Liz. You know, I have recently been to Detroit, and I was struck by the presence of the police everywhere I turned. I was struck by the billboard that says, the billboards that say majority Black Detroit votes. I was struck by the devastation of the Detroit landscape that has been allowed to, you know, like we were driving around and I just was like, house, vacant lot, empty house. This just the conditions that the Black community, or that have been created around the Black community, and that the Black community has to withstand in Detroit, were unknown to me in the specificity of it before I was there recently. And reading about the murders this summer in Detroit, and sort of asking myself, what is it going to take? Millions of people in the streets all over the country, millions of people, in the streets all over the world. And yet there is this cycle that I think will be broken by a refusal to be silent in the face of this violence, right? Like, I made Strong Island as a gift to my mother. I've come to understand over time that I also made it as a gift to myself, to do something about my brother's death that I wasn't able to do when he was dead. But, I think that these systems of oppression thrive in silence. They thrive, you know, when people feel like they can't tell their stories. They thrive when we used to have these old systems of feeling like there were only official news outlets and official versions of events, and there were only certain people who got to say what the facts were. And now this entire year has just been a remarkable example of what happens when things can break open. And in the breaking open, so much energy comes out of that. So much grief, so much love, so much Black love, so much pride in your community, so much ability to put your body on the line. I'm thinking a lot about Audre Lorde lately, and her asking us if you would put your body on the line, and just it's a heavy time. It's a heavy time, and I don't think that people in power and people who are perpetuating violence against the Black community and other communities, the trans community, BIPOC communities in general, I don't think that they realize that this pressure is only making us stronger. This pressure is actually not going to break us. It's actually the opposite kind of pressure, right? Like when you're forging something, I really feel like that's what I have seen over these last few months. And it's just, to see the work that's happening in Detroit and around the country has just been remarkable. And it makes me realize that, right now, I think one of the most powerful weapons in the country is a cell phone. A cell phone. We have seen the power of these first person acts of bravery, pointing cameras at things that people don't want us to see and don't want us to record, and making sure that they don't go unwitnessed.
Yes. So talking about witness and breaking things open, we spent a lot of the last 2 days talking about voice and figuring out your voice, figuring out the language of the movie, figuring out how to do that. Could you tell everyone a little bit about that process?
Sure.
Because I know that was a process.
It was a process. It was a process. It was full of lots of stopping and starting. It was full of lots of writing. It was full of me kind of taking a very practical approach to photographs. I believe that photographs are objects that carry energy with them, right? I think that they hold within them a charge, and that the charge is it's evident when you hold it. And I wanted that charge to be a part of the film. I wanted that tactile nature of the photographs to be a part of the film, because my experience of my family was a tactile one. We were a family of huggers. We were a family of people who said, "I love you" all the time. It was, for me, I wanted to get the audience inside my family as much as possible, as opposed to looking at my family. I didn't want my family to be objects to be observed. I wanted them to be people that you got to know. And so every decision was really made with that intention, including the way I interviewed people, which was really intimately, and I never pre-interviewed anybody. So all the conversations that you see in Strong Island were conversations that I was having with people for the first time after decades of silence. And so I think that just in that act of providing a place for Kevin and for Harvey and for my mother and for my sister to speak their truth, I think that's what you see in the film, is people who are finally, able to witness themselves, or testify rather, themselves as to what they've been through.
So in a way, that was the real day in court.
Yes,
Maybe.
exactly.
I mean, I don't want to put words in there, but
no, it's testifying. In the tradition of the Black church, it's like we treated it as testimony. Like we gave each person an opportunity to testify, and the testimony is devastating. It's damning, and it's undeniable. And it's one of the things that I love about my mother. I miss her every day, but her, she's just like a laser.
Like a laser. I know. I was taking down her words. I was taking down your words and her words, and I was like, Judith, when was the last time you watched a movie like this? But I was like, yes, she was like a laser. And the landscape, there was like the landscape of the photos, and you're handling them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you didn't come to that. I mean, and the landscape of your face and your close up and who you're talking to. I'm like, who are you talking to? I mean, and that there's a couple of moments like when you would like, if you could deal with it, like I felt like, you'd almost take a step back or you would laugh. It's like, if you're
uncomfortable.
If you're uncomfortable, is that it? And if you're uncomfortable, I don't give a shit. Leave the theater right now.
And go. Yeah.
Right. And it's like you set this trope up for, okay, I think I know who you're talking to. Like, I think, like, maybe you're talking to all the white men who look like all the white people that you've ever met before, who you can't tell, and who is that guy, and who are all those people. You're talking to me. You're asking me, do you either be witness or
bounce?
Leave or bounce. And you sort of give me the out, and it's very gentle. And it's also like, and you're like, and it's your loss if you leave. I mean, there's a little smirk there. There's this great little thing. Yeah. I don't know what I can't really.
It's my sarcasm. It is a smirk.
I love it. I loved it. But I mean, and I laughed. It was kind of the only time in the whole movie that I could laugh. And I was like, I know that, Yance. I love that, Yance. I'm so glad everyone got to have that moment with you for a moment. But then you go back to making us watch in this extraordinary way. It's just, every shot and every moment and the light and and the darkness and the train and your dad's journey and the music and your mother's description of the ladies in Brooklyn who knew she was pregnant, the Jewish ladies in Brooklyn. And I could tell how disappointed she was when
she left.
Well, when she left and when she moved, and she didn't get to have that communal experience with a whole lot of people. And the way that she described and you described redlining and segregation and being held in and the limitations and the danger and having left the danger and the security of being part of a whole city versus being an island.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think a lot about the time when my parents fled the city. It was a time when, the NYPD was circulating a pamphlet called Fear City, right? Which was talking about how New York was getting more and more dangerous. And it was essentially like, you ought to leave now. That's what Fear City. The Fear City was a pamphlet that had a skull on the cover.
Do you know what year that was?
I think it was 71. It was right around the time my parents left the city. And you can, if you Google the Fear City pamphlet, you can find it online.
Okay.
So my parents were looking for a better, safer place, and it's so ironic that, and obviously it was, it's all in the design, right? Obviously, it's all in the design. Relocating African Americans from what is now one of the most expensive places in the country is all in the design.
Brooklyn.
Right. Brooklyn, exactly. Like that the Black community in Brooklyn is getting smaller and smaller and priced out and pushed into poorer and poorer sections is all in the design. I think about Detroit when I think about the design, and about the fact that the state was, if I understand this correctly, Liz, and forgive me if I don't, that the city was under state control and until a white mayor was elected, and then the state was like, okay, never mind.
I guess you could say that. That is, yeah, that's a very simplified narrative. But yeah, emergency management was the official term, and it's a modern day colonialism, absolutely. And it led to even more disinvestment from the city economically. It really strengthened a lot of the redlining, the gentrification, and really divested from neighborhoods at the expense of building up the downtown, midtown, places where, they're looking for a return of the white flight.
Downtown is empty.
So, yeah.
I stayed at a hotel downtown and I was struck by how empty it was. I was like, there was a football stadium, there was a baseball stadium, there was a hockey arena, there's a basketball arena, I think, right? I was like,
yeah. There's a Detroit revolutionary who I really admire, Grace Lee Boggs, and she has a quote that says, Detroit is what the rest of the world has to look forward to. And I find a lot of comfort, I find a lot of solace in that quote, because I think, here is a place where folks have been having to imagine solutions to the worst of society's problems: homelessness, eviction, generational poverty, entrenched white supremacy, and have been doing so imaginatively, with love, with care, with community support through these relational networks for decades, and created a really vibrant, incredible, electric culture. I mean, you can't talk about Detroit without talking about Motown, without talking about techno, the music scene, the art scene that's exploding there. And that to me is like the soul of that resilience, that lineage of Detroit. And I think that it's a model in a lot of ways of what this late stage capitalist, quite frankly, white supremacist post-industrial landscape is going to look like. One of the things that devastated me so much about this movie was, I was prepared for a movie about how racist our criminal justice system was. But it's really a movie about the many, many, many afterlives of slavery. It's a movie about all the different ways that racism breaks our spirit and shortens our lifespans and destroys our families. The story of your grandfather, dying in the waiting room from an asthma attack. And as an environmental justice activist, we see that too often, all the time. In Detroit, I live right next to 48217, which has the worst air quality in the entire state of Michigan. This is a common story. It's the segregation and the redlining that you described within Central Islip. And, it's the harassment that your family faced with the car outside and the phone calls. I mean, this story, this chronicles the many, many, many different manifestations of racism. And so when we see that trended over time, we see a landscape like Detroit. So that's why I think it's so important that we're looking to this city right now. And I'm so happy to see that throughout this festival, you're uplifting the voices of Tawana Petty, you're uplifting the voices of folks who have been imagining those solutions.
I want to say in the same breath that we're talking about the devastation, we have to talk about DNA. We have to talk about the organization that Liz is the program manager for, which is the Allied Media Conference. We have to talk about the really extraordinary, the movement for land reclamation, which Atieno, who made this great film called Side Lots, showed, and the DNA also sponsored this great set of shorts that they did a call out to the artist community, and they said, okay, make your response to COVID, and they called it Radical Remedies. So we showed, a bunch of those shorts, and it's a thriving artistic, evolutionary and revolutionary community that has extraordinary, social entrepreneurial and amazing, ideas about rapid response in the time of crisis, which is as, artistic as it is about food and PPP and water, which is a big, huge issue, and human rights and transforming, civil rights into human rights and the city residential rights into human rights. So we've been thinking about all those things in the first person for the last 2.5 days. But we wanted to close this evening with one of the most extraordinary pieces of first person testimony, art, storytelling, story co-creation that I've seen in a really, really long time. And that I know when you made, it's as much a love letter to your mother and an act of healing. And I'm so glad to hear you say that, but it's an offering to so many others in so many communities who can see this story in their work. Can you talk about how did you crack the code on your storytelling?
So I hadn't cracked the code in the storytelling. So I realized that part of what I needed as a character in the film was to be in a space alone. I needed to be even though I was in a room full of a film crew, we created this feeling of aloneness because I needed to say things I had never said before. And knowing that I was going to do that felt tremendously risky for me. And also tremendously necessary. I think I was tired of my own silence. And I think that when I finally broke that silence, what you got was my anger. What you got was my frustration. What you got was the person who is honest to God, does not know what the man who murdered my brother looks like. Never seen him before in my life. I have never laid eyes on him. Right? What you get is a person who realizes that, the Breonna Taylor grand jury was as broken as my brother's grand jury. Right? And we need to reform grand jury rules. They are not laws. They are rules. There is a way to protect grand jurors and maintain their anonymity so that they can do their jobs. But we need to also make sure that we have a mechanism for checking the behavior of prosecutors who are not necessarily doing the people's work when they go into these grand juries. There should be transparency. That's a holdover from Alexander Hamilton. And I think that he would be just fine if we put it down now, because we don't need the grand juries in the same way that we did, please. I went through a process of working on the film, and then I stopped working on the film when my mom died. And then when I picked it up again, and I hadn't been a character in the film before she died. After she died, I realized that I had been using her ability to be so articulate about how she felt and to voice, all of her anger and clarity and analysis. I was hiding behind that. And when she passed away, I realized that the story wasn't finished yet, and two, that I couldn't hide anymore. And so, deciding to be a character in the film was also a huge choice for me, because I wasn't at first. I didn't want to be. I was, I was already feeling vulnerable enough, having to talk about my dead brother's unpunished murder, and knowing that knowing that I would have to make that choice was one that frightened me. But I had a lot of support. I had a great team over the many years that it took to make this film. Many people contributed to putting it together. Judith, you and Chicken and Egg were some of the first people. I think you were my first grant ever for this film. So you were one of the first people I ever talked about this film with.
Yeah, I remember. I think you must have a story.
We were at Full Frame.
Were we at Full Frame?
We were at Full Frame, a film festival in North Carolina, and you were going out of the theater, and I was coming in, and I've watched your body of work. Talking about first person filmmaking, I knew your body of work so well that I was like, I have a personal story to tell, and I at the time I just wanted your advice. How do you do this? I wanted somebody to say to me, well, this is a way that you can do it. And what you wound up doing was encouraging me to apply to Chicken and Egg, and that was an incredible life-changing experience. But I don't know, it's just, yeah, so much happened. And then I like went to Denmark to edit the film again. Like I needed to leave the country. Like I literally, I missed Trump v. Hillary because the editor, I partly felt like Baldwin in that I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this again, I need to get out of here because this is too much. I can't tell this story and be surrounded by the story at the same time because people were being murdered all throughout the production of this film. All throughout. Trayvon Martin happened during the making of this film. Tatiana Jefferson, Renisha McBride, all of these people. Anyway.
And then, boy, did you put yourself in this movie. And those layers, the layers, and then ultimately, the closest close-up is yours with us to us, isn't it? I think
I wanted to be that shot, right? I was trying to we were just trying to figure out my shot, and I was like, I want to close and then closer. And when Alan framed me the way that he did, I was like, yes, because that looks like I'm having an internal dialogue. I wanted to have this feeling of an internal dialogue. I wanted people to realize that they were hearing things from me in an unfiltered way. It's not scripted. I was interviewed 5 times for the film. I read from a piece of paper once because I was getting the details of the order of how I remembered my brother's death being told to me wrong. That was from a journal. But I wanted to have, I wanted Black folks to have a sense of, of kinship with me. I wanted the closeness to establish the kind of love between Black people that I grew up. Like my parents, told me to greet every Black person that I saw on the street, whether I knew them or not. Right. So it was that kind. So I wanted a Black audience to have that kind of experience with my face. I wanted a white audience to feel like I was up in your face and that it was a confrontation and that you can't take it at any time. You may be excused. And I think that.
And it worked.
I think it worked.
So did you, that just sort of, did you know that going into that box?
Going into that box, I knew that I was hot, as my mother would say, right? I was hot. Every time I sat down for an interview, I was hot. And so I wanted to capture that as closely as I could. And I can be kind of stoic because as Black people, you have to have a shield, right? You have to be able to protect yourself when you're out in the world. And so my mother, you can read her emotion. She's a beautiful face. She's expressive. Me, I have been through so much. I mean, I'm not even talking about my gender identity and going through the process of coming out to myself and that whole journey is a subtext in the film. But I can be so stoic that I also knew that if you didn't get that close to my face, you wouldn't register my emotion. right? Especially if you're not accustomed to looking at Black people that closely, right? Especially if you don't ever especially if you've never been that close to a Black face before. So part of it was that, me realizing that I needed to give the audience a way to see through my defenses. And that was a hard choice. I am still uncomfortable sometimes looking at myself because I can see the pain that I'm in. But I think it's what makes the movie effective.
Yeah, I think so too.
I really felt that kinship.
Mm-hmm.
I felt it really deeply. It was one of the things that made me most emotional. I felt it, and I think you accomplished it in a really beautiful, loving way. There's a quote by Alice Walker that I return to often, and she says, "Those who love us never leave us alone with our grief." And I feel like you're not leaving us alone. Even as we continue to grieve, as we continue to fight for the defunding of the police, for an ending of this racist system, you're not leaving us alone. And we're not leaving you alone with your grief over your brother. And what you said about feeling tired of your silence, it really resonates with me. And I think that is the current that's pushing the momentum of this movement forward. And I love that you called, our ancestor, Audre Lorde, into this space tonight. She said, when we speak, we're afraid. When we're silent, we're still afraid. So it's better to speak knowing we were never meant to survive. And we know we're not meant to survive in these systems. So it's better to speak.
Yeah, your silence will not protect you.
Absolutely.
And once you realize that, it's like, that is freedom. Right? Once you realize that your silence isn't going to protect you, you're like, wait, hold up. So that has been someone else's idea. My silence has been someone else's idea this entire time.
Mm.
What protects me, right? What has helped my heart is speaking. Oh, I'm on to this, right? I'm on to this now. And that's what was so exciting about this summer. Right? Even though our brother George Floyd, and thank God for that 17-year-old girl who had the courage to stand there, right? People say he's looking at the camera, Chauvin. Chauvin wasn't looking at a camera. Chauvin was looking at a 17-year-old girl. Chauvin was making direct eye contact with that young lady, daring her to continue filming, and she didn't back down. Right? She didn't back down because she knew that she was as powerful as he was in that moment. And that young lady is the hero of this story. If there is a hero, that young lady is a hero. But once you realize that your silence is somebody else's idea, forget about it.
That's part of the imagination battle that we were talking about earlier. That's part of the imagination battle that we have to do. Yeah.
I like that imagination battle.
Liz, what was the other thing that you talked about earlier? You used a term for turning a gun into a shovel.
Yes. So I organized with a collective based in Oakland. We're called Led to Life. And
what do you call it?
Led to Life.
Led to Life. LED?
Yes, LEAD.
LEAD.
Yes, it's inspired by the biblical lineage of turning swords into plowshares. And really it's about alchemizing violence into more regenerative futures. We collect guns back from the community, and then we melt those guns in public ceremonies into shovels and into other life-affirming tools. And then we use those tools to plant trees, to lead permaculture action days at Indigenous land trusts and Black-led urban farms. Our entire prayer is to really transmute the violence of police terrorism in particular, but just gun violence in general. And to turn our rage and our helplessness and our grief and our trauma and turn it into something that actually is regenerative. So we rely upon ceremony. We rely upon public ritual. We use the language of alchemy as a way to really transmute the violence that we are literally melting down and turning into something that actually affirms Black life.
Do you do that in Detroit too?
We actually had a ceremony planned for this summer with the Allied Media Conference, and unfortunately, everything went online because of Miss Corona Lachey virus, as we know. But yes, we are definitely rooted in Detroit in many ways, you know, because I'm in Detroit and so much of our community is based there. And also, you know, Detroit, it was the last stop on the Underground Railroad. It used to be called Midnight City. I mean, it's a city where folks have, like we've been discussing throughout this conversation, where this lineage of alchemizing violence runs so deep. It runs so deep. And I love, Judith, that you shouted out DNA, Detroit Narrative Agency, because they're really doing that work. And Yance, so many of the narratives you brought up, Detroit, you know, being abandoned, Detroit being a poster child, really, of the devastation of late stage capitalism, post-industrialism, you know, Detroit Narrative Agency, Allied Media, we're working really hard to change those narratives from the ground up because we love our city.
As is Wayne State University, and none of us would be here tonight without them and the Freep Film Festival, which I owe such a debt of gratitude for bringing me there last year for an amazing spring semester that got cut short, but we still were able to carry through via Zoom and extended that conversation through this weekend, which has been so special. I think there's so much alchemy in your movie. You know, I mean, I think that the you know, the light and the dark and the way you use so much of the imagery and the storytelling, and I mean, and then even the way that you turn the language around, you turn the narrative around of like, do you see my brother dredge the river, and you will see him, and you will see so many others whose fear is reasonable. The liver is unremarkable, right? But you're like, the kidney is unremarkable. But when you say the heart is unremarkable, it's like, no, ma'am, the most remarkable heart and remarkable love and a remarkable family that we get to through this remarkable movie and your remarkable courage and willingness to break it all open so you could give your mother her day in court. And you know,
from the place where she held court. My mother held court in the kitchen, right?
Even the way you
right there.
Yeah, so regal. She's in the center. You know, it's like I don't know. You know, there's like there's no power of thirds. It's just the power of Barbara.
The power of.
She's a warrior. She's a warrior.
I sat her right, and we called it the Queen's chair. Yeah, we called it the Queen's chair, because that's what she was, you know. And when she sat in that chair, and when we had those conversations, she was talking about those things for the first time. We were having those conversations for the first time with each other. We broke a silence within our family. Wow. That was also tremendously healing. And it was amazing to me that we had gone so many years without speaking about our pain to one another, because, you know, I think we were trying to protect each other from, you know, like you don't want to make someone else's pain worse. You don't want to magnify someone else's pain, right? But then I think you get to a point where you realize that the sheltering is actually, it's not sheltering anybody. You're just sort of like baking yourself. Right, like you're sort of hardening yourself, and so being able to break that silence with one another was a tremendous privilege for me, and I think a tremendous, you know, gift that I know that my mother, even though she never saw the end of the film, just the fact that I was doing the interviews and we were shooting, you know, so often at the house, she felt that she knew that her son's story was going to be told. And that was really good for me.
You know, I think, well, it certainly is. It is. The other gift that I feel like she gave was that way that she described your father and she breaking their silence, and her pushing him to love her and to grieve together. That's the way that the way that you held the room, right? That's their bedroom, right?
Yeah,
So you
that's
held that room and the bed and her story. It's extraordinary, and I think that that's a gift and a model that unfortunately so many families are going to need those words and that imagery, and that, no, I am not going to let you push me away. No, I am going to come to the other side of the bed. No, you cannot do that. It's just
it's so good to hear Liz talk about ceremony, right? Because I think that people need to learn how to mourn together, right? Like there's such deep pain. There's such deep pain. There's so many people dying. And so many of them are from our community. So many of them are people of color. There's nobody leading us in a national mourning, right? We have to come up with these rituals ourselves. And I think that, my father, I can only imagine, because he had a massive stroke the year after my brother died. I can only imagine the loop that was in his head, because I know he felt like he had failed to keep his son alive. I know he felt like it had, I think that we need to have rituals. We need to learn how to mourn together. We need to understand that mourning together is actually a way of healing, faster and emerging from trauma stronger than mourning on your own.
Ashe, absolutely. Ceremony, really, I've worked alongside Anti-Police Terror Project in Oakland closely. I've worked with so many mothers like your own, Yance, and have seen how ceremony really repairs our relationship to trauma, to grief, especially when it comes at the hands of the state, or when it comes, from gun violence. It really can. Deep repair is possible. And one of the things that excites me about this abolitionist movement for justice is that I feel like healing justice and ceremony is deeply interwoven into how we're choosing to care for one another. I would say that this film is a ceremony. This film, like Nancy, you called in the Black, Southern spiritual traditions of the church. This is testimony, right? Like, this is public witnessing. Your mother held court in her kitchen when the grand juror failed her. I'm thinking in Detroit tomorrow, virtually, there's going to be a people's tribunal for Hakeem Littleton, who was murdered by Detroit Police Department 10 years ago and never received justice. So here we are, 10 years later, Detroit Will Breathe, Coalition Against Police Brutality, demanding that his name not be lost. And even though we're going to be on Zoom, and even though it's 10 years too late, this is a form of ceremony. It's a way of bearing witness. It's a way of bearing witness and not leaving each other alone with our grief, as Alice Walker said.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. It sounds amazing.
Thanks.
Is there a way for people to join tomorrow? Is that public?
Yeah, it's going to be on Facebook Live. Let's see. I can pull the flyer up, and I can send it to you, Judith, if you can.
You could send it to Caitlin, and they could put it in the chat right now.
Okay, great.
Here, and we could also let people know about this for sure. I want to make sure everybody knows we've been talking about DNA, that they were co-hosts tonight, along with the Freep Film Festival and along with State University. And they specifically wanted to co-host this evening because they love this movie and are deeply appreciative and a huge fan of your work and a huge fan of Liz. And they thought this was like the right alchemy, if you will, putting the three of us together to have this discussion. I want to be aware and respectful of the time, and I want to be aware of respectful of this chat, and I recognize that it's very hard for people to be loving this movie so much and the work of Yance and Liz, and to not be able to like be here phone like that. If anyone has a big question they want to be asked, if you go to the comment section, you could see what people are saying and what they're loving about the movie and their responses. If anyone has a question or something else that they need to say, please say it in the chat. And please let me know. Could someone let me know where we are? I just need to know where we are in time so I could be deeply respectful of everything today.
It's about 8:40.
Okay. You know, I wrote all over my notes. Anyway, okay.
So in case people don't know, there is a Netflix YouTube channel, and Strong Island is available for free on that channel. So you don't have to pay to see it now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's actually a collection, Black Lives Matter themed collection of films like The 13th and other really important films on the Netflix YouTube channel. It's all free.
Oh, that's wonderful. Please, thank you. And please let everybody know that. Yance, is there any chance that there is going to be grand jury reform? Is that being called for? Is that trying to be dismantled and refashioned in this moment?
I think that people realize, after Ferguson, I think that people have realized that the prosecutor's office is also a place where reform needs to happen. I've been encouraged by the election of progressive prosecutors around the country. We need to continue to push for transparency in the grand jury process. We need to continue to push for, for taking away this like sort of special set of rights that are afforded to police officers after they take a life. Like you don't have to talk to investigators for a certain period of time, and there's literally something called the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which supersedes, if you read it, the actual Bill of Rights. It creates a special category of citizen, and it's important because almost all of it relates to misconduct. All of it relates to fatal interactions. All of it relates to how you can be questioned, when you can be questioned, who can do the questioning. There's from top to bottom, right? We have to understand that it's broken. I think that we do understand that it's broken. We have, right? But I think that there isn't a fix. Right? You can't, like I said, systems do what they were designed to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so what excites me is that people are reimagining or actually they're not reimagining, because we know what we need in our communities. And people are insisting that that our politicians actually be accountable to the people and not to law enforcement unions and other really powerful special interest groups that, the gun lobby and other, people that are happy to see Black folks hemmed in, gunned down, and yeah. It's got to stop. It will stop.
It has to stop.
That's the thing. It will stop, right? It will stop.
It will stop. And we have to stop. We have to stop this because we're over time. But so I think that's the right place to end with. We will stop with the words that it will stop. And I hope that, somebody just said, Yance, your voice was a bomb for me. Your scream is one that I have yet to do for my father, whose life was stolen 48 years ago. Our family still lives in that house of bone. Thank you for showing there's a way out.
Indeed, there is.
So thank you for showing us there's a way out. Thank you, Liz, for showing us that there's a way through, and that ritual is a healing and a beautiful, beautiful, extraordinary, critical thing that you are doing the work. What are we calling it these days? The essential work. And Yance, you're doing the essential work. And
Thank you.
and I hope that we could all continue to work together in community. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, DNA. Thank you, Freep Film Festival. Thank you, Wayne State. It's been a great weekend. I'm clearly tired and emotional. I just want to thank your mother and your sister for being so brave and courageous, and for witnessing with you and the whole team behind that film. You didn't just deserve the Oscar nomination, you deserve to win, but more will come. But the winning came with your mother sitting down and having those extraordinary exchanges with you, and for all of us being party to it. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much for this discussion. It's been really great to talk to you both. Liz, thank you for the work that you do. If I roll through Detroit again, I will definitely try to connect. But thank you both, really.
Okay, everyone, stay healthy, stay safe. And what was the last thing you said? Because I wanted to end with that. This will end?
This will stop.
This will stop.
This will stop.
This will stop. Okay, last word.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you both.
Good night.